You'll flip for Metal Storm. It's NES Works Gaiden Episode 9. Well, maybe I lied last week in the Batman episode. I said we'd be getting back to 1987 releases, but Metal Storm did not exist in 1987. It could not have existed. Like Batman, this is a game from several years later, and it makes use of more advanced mapper chip technology than existed in 1987. It runs on the MMC3 chip that offered developers greater memory and more advanced features, like split-screen scrolling. It's the tech that powered Super Mario Bros. 3, and it's one MMC greater than anything that existed in 1987. Indeed, we'll be looking at the world's one and only MMC2-based game in a few weeks. But then, this is not February 1991's release of Metal Storm. No, this episode takes us even further into the future to, why, today. The year 2020, which seemed inconceivably far-flung into the distance of entropy when Metal Storm appeared on Nintendo Power's cover. And now here we are, writing out humanity's final days on Earth with cool reissues of rare NES games. Happy New Year! The 2020 reissue of Metal Storm comes to us from Retrobit, a company primarily known for clone hardware, but that has also dipped its toe into reissues, mostly from Irem for the moment. Retrobit previously brought us a US release for the previously Japan-only Holy Diver, and an affordable version of R-Type 3 for Super NES. And now they've crossed those streams a bit for Metal Storm. The version of Metal Storm that shipped here in the US in the 90s wasn't a complete 100% conversion of the Japanese release. While the mechanics and level designs were identical, the American version saw a few small visual tweaks. For example, the developers adjusted some of the color palettes to allow the on-screen action to read a little more easily. More substantially, the American release jumped immediately to the title screen where the Japanese game featured a simple but slick attract cinematic that explained the story. It turns out Metal Storm basically had the same plot as the Guardian Legend, with a massive, ancient, planet-sized war machine looming dangerously on the outskirts of civilized space. The only hope for humanity was the M308 gunner, a Gundam-esque or Valkyrie-like mecha suit that swoops in to blow up the mad planet from the inside. American kids only saw hints of this on the box art, but over on the other side of the pond, they enjoyed a showcase demo that laid this out in explicit terms. The Japanese version also included an extra hard difficulty level, apparently even harder than the expert mode that could be unlocked with a password upon completion of the standard US game. It's this version that Retrobit has chosen to reissue, hence this being a Gaiden episode, an English release for the unexpurgated Japanese cartridge. The difficulty levels carry forward, as does an English-language translation for the full intro. The M308 gunner has reverted from orange to white here again, too. It's such a faithful port, in fact, that passwords from the Japanese release still work here. That includes the handy Japan-only cheat codes that offer power boosts or 30 lives at the outset, none of which appeared in the American version. These extra lives come in pretty handy because Metal Storm is an unflinchingly tough game. Its action centers on a unique play mechanic that requires a little practice to master, and there's very little clemency here from the bad guys. The M308 looks pretty tough, but appearances can be deceiving. The forces of Earth seem to have pinned the planet's salvation on a flimsy excuse for a mech that detonates at the slightest touch of a hazard. Enemy projectiles, spikes, the gently rounded aft portions of a gun emplacement, each and every one of these hazards causes the M308 to detonate in a very cool-looking, but also very frustrating ball of explosive flame. By the time of Metal Storm's original release, most action games were offering players a life bar, but that seems not to have been Irem's thing. The developer here was actually an Irem subsidiary called Tamtex that was absorbed into the company. A few years later, a bunch of developers took off from Irem to establish Nazca, which gave us one-hit kill arcade works in The Hunt and Metal Slug. Maybe it was something in the water over there. The ephemeral fragility of life in a giant mech wasn't the only thing that set Metal Storm apart from most of its contemporaries. While the game plays as a platform-based run-and-gun shooter in the tradition of Ghosts and Goblins and Contra, it shakes up the genre. In fact, it flips the whole thing entirely upside down. The M308 may not be able to shrug off a hit, but it has the power to turn the tables on the bad guys and battle on its own terms. At any time, the M308 can upgrade a simple jump into a total reversal of gravity in its current environments. By pressing the jump button in conjunction with either up or down, whichever direction is the opposite from gravity's current orientation, players can cause the M308 to flip upside down and begin using the opposite side of the screen as platforms. Press down plus jump and the ceiling becomes the floor, in true Lionel Richie style. It's not only the M308 that has its orientation reversed though. Just about every enemy that isn't tethered to the spot flips upside down as well. This opens up some unique gameplay strategies, especially once you throw other factors into the mix. Why just shoot an enemy when you can flip everything upside down and blast your foes while they're being flopped across their x-axis? The first level doesn't actually require you to make use of gravity effects until nearly the very end, when you reach a tall barrier that can't be passed with a standard jump. Later levels function effectively as puzzles, loaded with one-way barriers and structures that demand fine control over your gravity capabilities. The M308 is fully capable of reversing gravity in midair. With enough dexterity and proper timing, you can make it effectively hover through certain spaces. The game never actually requires you to take things that far, but you will come across areas where you need to perform a midair reversal in order to clear an expansive hazard. The need to reverse can make for some mind-bending gameplay. Fairly simple hazards often take a moment to mentally unravel when you encounter them upside down. Oftentimes, the solution to a platform sequence is just reverse gravity, but since games and Planet Earth have conditioned us to think in terms of up and down, it's not always intuitive. Metal Storm also has a constantly shifting approach to level design that can be quite disorienting. Stage 2 is a one-way platform spatial puzzle, but Stage 3 is a more straightforward assault that keeps players on their toes with an endless stream of enemies attacking along a rail. Stage 4 is a brutal auto-scrolling challenge that forces players to contend with threats approaching from all angles while trapped in a moving cage that constantly changes its direction. Stage 5 is a gauntlet of laser beam traps, while Stage 6 consists of endlessly rising elevators in a dizzying Mebius strip where the M308 has to avoid the top and bottoms of the screens or risk instant explosion. And then there are the bosses, which take advantage of both the game mechanics and the generally head-spinning nature of the action. Something as simple as a boss that moves around the room while trying to pin you in a corner can be vexing when you have to avoid it by navigating an endless stream of laser beams. And don't even ask about the Stage 6 boss, in which the bosses themselves are the only safe place to stand. You need to clear out 3 drones, circling a fatal laser perimeter very carefully, as each one you destroy reduces the amount of safe ground you have to stand on. And then you have to do it all over again before taking on the simple final boss, a series of safety interlocks that allow the evil robo-planet to self-destruct. Once that's done, the unlockable expert mode stuffs its levels with new hazards that make the harrowing first playthrough feel like a teddy bear picnic. Tamtex's designers and programmers make use of the MMC3 chip's newfangled advanced scrolling capabilities to double down on Metal Storm's mind-boggling nature. For example, there's parallax scrolling in Stage 3, but not in the way you'd expect. While the stage scrolls horizontally, the background scrolls vertically as you advance, which is a lot trippier than you might think. Honestly, a big part of Metal Storm's challenge comes from the way it messes with your head, which is pretty clever. All of this adds up to a game that has acquired a reputation as one of the NES's notable obscurities. Yeah, it got a Nintendo Power cover back in the day, but Irem was never a juggernaut on NES, and the game was fairly hard to come by at retail even when it was brand new. As such, Metal Storm carts alone tend to sell for about $100, with box copies pushing into the rarefied ranks of $300 plus NES releases. Even the Japanese version has shot up to hundreds of dollars. Its price boost ironically driven by foreign players looking for a less expensive alternative to the NES cart, or for a slightly cooler version of the same game. This fact alone elevates Retrobit's Reissue from an interesting curio to a valuable essential. Metal Storm deserves to be in every NES collector's library, but not every NES collector, including myself, wants to drop 300 big ones for the pleasure of owning it. This 2020 re-release offers a valuable service without upsetting the collector's market. Since it's not exactly the same game as the NES cart, the packaging and cart looks similar to the original without being identical, Retrobit scratches the collector's itch without being an identical facsimile of the valuable original that would muddy the aftermarket for collectors. It's also worth noting that this entire reissue package sells for $70, which is a lot cheaper than the NES or Famicom carts alone. The package includes a boxed version of the game with one of 3 different cartridge colorways depending on the retailer. It's a high-quality package with foil embossing on the box and a glossy dual-language manual on heavy paper stock. There's also a comically oversized pen and some litho art. But most importantly, the Metal Storm CE comes with a small figurine of the M308 gunner, a great nod to the classic Nintendo Power cover. It's not an identical match to that model, since the cover model was posed in a sort of strange position, but it's great to have a physical memento of such a great game. And I say that as someone who doesn't even want to own collectibles these days. All in all, Metal Storm CE defines a great format for classic game preservation. It makes an expensive, hard-to-find game available and affordable again. It comes with lots of extras, and it even gives seasoned fans of the game a reason to experience a different take on an old favorite. My one wish list hope here is that Retrobit branches out to work with publishers besides Irem. I mean, Irem was great, but just think of all those impossible, expensive late-era Taito releases that are just begging to be brought back to life. Think Little Samson or Power Blade 2. For now, though, I'm just happy to see one of the NES's greatest cult favorites back on the market in a format that does justice to its mythic status, and for less than $300.